She only wanted a quiet meal, a simple milkshake in the corner of a small-town diner. But peace is fragile, and sometimes cruelty hunts the ones least able to fight back. Whispers turned to laughter, and laughter turned into something far darker. A young disabled girl, already carrying the weight of her difference, was humiliated in front of a room full of strangers. No one moved. No one spoke. Until an hour later, when the door opened, what walked in would change everything, not just for her, but for every single person watching. The question is, what would you have done? The diner wasn't much to look at. Just a flickering neon sign, worn vinyl booths, and the smell of bacon grease clinging to the air. But for locals, it was more than a place to eat. It was a routine, a comfort, the kind of spot where the waitress knew your order before you sat down. For Alana, that mattered more than anyone knew. She was young, living with a disability that made her walk slower, her steps uneven but determined. Life had taught her to expect stares, whispers, and pity from strangers. But here, in this small-town diner, she could almost forget. She'd tuck herself into the corner booth, sip on a strawberry milkshake, and watch the world without feeling like the world was watching her. Home wasn't easy. She lived with her grandmother in a modest house just a few streets away. Money was tight, but love was steady. Her grandmother, worn by age yet unshaken by hardship, was her anchor. She reminded Alana daily that strength wasn't about moving quickly or looking like everyone else. It was about enduring, about showing up even when the world seemed determined to push you down. Still, the outside world wasn't kind. Children at school mimicked her walk. Adults spoke to her with slow, careful voices as though she couldn't understand. Strangers pretended not to see her. And though she never complained, the weight of being treated as different pressed on her shoulders every day. That's why the diner felt sacred. It was one of the few places where she could just be a girl with a sweet tooth, not a disabled girl defined by her condition. The jukebox humming in the corner, the sizzle of food on the grill, the steady murmur of conversation. It all wrapped around her like a blanket. But comfort is fragile. For every safe place, there are people who see vulnerability as an invitation to be cruel. And on one seemingly ordinary afternoon, in the same booth where she always sat, Alana would learn that even the warmest spaces can turn cold in an instant. The afternoon sun spilled through the diner windows, laying stripes of light across the floor. Alana sat tucked into her corner booth, her milkshake sweating in the heat, a small oasis of comfort in her day. But comfort never lasts long when cruelty decides to strike. At first, it was a whisper. 2 teenage boys in the next booth, leaning in close, their eyes fixed on her. The kind of laugh that wasn't shared with her but aimed at her. Sharp, cutting, designed to sting. Alana kept her gaze on the table, willing herself not to notice. She'd learned to live with stares, to pretend she didn't hear. But these boys weren't content to whisper. One of them stood, limping dramatically across the floor toward the napkin dispenser, dragging his foot in a mocking imitation of her uneven walk. His friend slapped the table, howling with laughter. The sound filled the diner, bouncing off chrome counters and cracked vinyl seats. Heads turned. A few patrons shifted uncomfortably. But most, they lowered their eyes, pretending not to notice. Alana's cheeks flushed hot. She clutched her glass tighter, her hand trembling against the cold. Every fiber of her wanted to disappear into the booth, to melt into the shadows. But the boys weren't finished. One leaned close, his shadow falling across her milkshake. His grin was cruel, his eyes daring her to react. And then, with a sudden motion, his hand struck her face. The sound cracked through the diner like a gunshot, a sharp, humiliating slap that carried more than just pain. It carried every cruel word she'd ever heard, every stare she'd ever endured, every moment she'd been made to feel less. She froze. The sting on her cheek was nothing compared to the hollow ache in her chest. Her eyes burned, her hands shook, but she couldn't bring herself to move. Around her, time seemed to falter. The waitress stood stiff behind the counter. A man in the corner lowered his head to his coffee. No one stepped in. The boys swaggered back to their booth, puffed up with triumph. Their laughter was louder now, sharper, feeding on the silence of the room. And that silence, the silence of adults who should have known better, hurt worse than the slap itself. Alana sat alone, humiliated, her supposed safe haven shattered. She had learned long ago that cruelty could strike anywhere, but she hadn't expected it here. Not in this booth, not in this diner, but fate was not finished. Just as the boys settled back into their seats, the bell above the door jingled. Heavy footsteps followed, boots that hit the floor with a weight that made the tiles hum. Shadows stretched long across the diner, and in an instant, the room's attention shifted. The bullies didn't know it yet, but the laughter that filled their lungs was about to choke on silence, because what walked in next would change everything. The bell above the diner door jingled again, but this time it didn't fade into the background like before. The sound hung heavy, followed by the slow thud of boots on tile. One pair, then another, then more. Heads turned as a group of bikers filed in, their leather jackets worn, their patches catching the dim light. Their presence filled the small diner instantly, swallowing the air with a weight that made the bullies' laughter die mid-breath. These weren't the kind of men anyone ignored. Their faces were hardened by miles of open road, their eyes sharp, scanning every corner of the room. And then silence. That unbearable silence that presses down harder than noise ever could. Alana sat frozen, still clutching her milkshake, her cheek burning from the slap. She didn't dare look up, but she felt it. The bikers had noticed her. Noticed her trembling hands. Noticed the bullies smirking in the booth nearby. Noticed everything the rest of the diner had tried to ignore. One of the bikers, broad-shouldered and towering, stopped dead in the center of the floor. His gaze landed on Alana, then shifted to the two boys, still pretending to be braver than they were. His jaw tightened. The room waited. The bullies exchanged nervous glances, their confidence beginning to slip. Their show of bravado wasn't built for this kind of audience, but before they could move, another biker slid into the booth beside Alana. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His sheer presence was enough to form a shield around her, an unspoken wall of protection. The lead biker turned back to the boys. He walked toward them slowly, each step deliberate, the air thick with tension. The boys tried to laugh, but their voices cracked, betraying them. Everyone in the diner could feel the balance shift. The power had changed hands. And then, without warning, the biker's hand slammed flat against their table. The plates rattled. The bullies flinched, their eyes wide. He leaned in close, so close they could feel his breath. And though no words left his mouth, the message was clear. Enough. The boys sat rigid, their smirks gone, replaced by fear that crawled up their necks like fire. They had been kings of cruelty minutes ago, but now they were nothing more than scared children caught in the act. The diner watched, every pair of eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. For the first time that day, Alana didn't feel invisible. For the first time, the silence in the room didn't crush her. It held her up. The bikers didn't hurt the boys. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough to dismantle the cruelty, to strip away the false power of bullies who thrived on weakness. The leader stood tall, his shadow stretching across the booth, until the boys, shaking, slid out of their seats and stumbled toward the door. The bell rang again as they fled, the sound sharp and final. Alana sat in stunned quiet, tears welling in her eyes, not just from the pain of the slap, but from the overwhelming rush of something she hadn't felt in so long: safety. She wasn't alone anymore. Someone had stood up. Someone had seen her. The diner began to breathe again, as though the room itself had been holding its lungs. People who had lowered their eyes now dared to look up. And though no applause broke out, though no one cheered, the shift in the air was undeniable. The shame was no longer hers to carry. It belonged to every silent witness who had done nothing. And yet, the question hung heavy in the air. Why had it taken strangers, rough and weathered from the road, to do what no one else had the courage to do? The boys were gone, but their absence left a heavy echo behind them. The diner was silent again, though this silence felt different. It wasn't the silence of cowardice, but the uneasy quiet that comes after truth is laid bare. People shifted in their seats, ashamed to meet each other's eyes. A mirror had been held up, and no one liked the reflection staring back. Alana sat still, her milkshake now melted, untouched. Her cheek throbbed faintly, but the sting was nothing compared to the knot of emotions swirling inside her. Embarrassment, relief, gratitude, and something else, something sharper. A question that burned hotter than the slap itself. Why had no one stopped it? The bikers remained close. One of them gently slid a napkin across the table toward her, a small gesture, but enough to break the ice that had frozen her in place. She pressed it to her cheek, not just to soothe the redness, but to ground herself in the moment. She was safe now. But safety had come from strangers who looked nothing like heroes, men society might have judged at first glance. That truth sat heavy. The waitress finally moved, approaching with trembling hands to clear empty cups. Her eyes met Alana's for the briefest second, then darted away. Around the room, people shifted uncomfortably, some staring at their plates, others pretending to be absorbed in the hum of the old jukebox. They all knew what had happened. They all knew they had done nothing. It's easy to condemn the bullies, but harder to confront the silence of the bystanders. Silence, after all, is the soil in which cruelty grows. As Alana sat there, she realized that this wasn't just about two boys in a diner. It was about every whispered insult she had heard in school hallways, every sideways glance when she walked unevenly down the street, every cruel laugh that cut deeper than words. This moment was just one chapter in a much larger story, a story that millions live every single day. But today was different. Today, Justice had walked through the door wearing leather jackets and road dust. Today she had been seen, defended, protected, and though it didn't erase the pain, it planted something new inside her. The belief that sometimes, even in the darkest rooms, light can still enter. As the bikers finished their meals, they didn't speak to the crowd, didn't scold the bystanders, didn't even acknowledge the boys who had fled. They simply paid their bill, nodded once to Alana, and left as quietly as they had arrived. The sound of their engines roared outside, fading into the distance like thunder moving on to another storm. The diner returned to its ordinary rhythm, the clink of dishes, the murmur of small talk, but nothing truly returned to normal. For Alana, there would always be a before and after that day. Before, where cruelty went unchecked. After, where she learned that kindness could come from the most unexpected places, and for everyone else in that room. They were left with the uncomfortable weight of their own silence, the memory of two boys tormenting a girl, and their own choice to sit and watch. A lesson written not in words, but in shame. This story isn't just about one girl in one diner. It's about what happens every day, in classrooms, in workplaces, on sidewalks, when cruelty is allowed to thrive, and silence gives it shelter. Racism, ableism, prejudice, they don't always come as grand acts of hate. Sometimes, they're as simple as laughter that cuts like glass, or a hand that strikes when no one steps in to stop it. The question is, what role do we play when it happens in front of us? Do we lower our eyes, waiting for someone else to act? Or do we find the courage to stand up, to break the silence, to be the shield for someone who can't fight alone? Because here's the truth. Heroes don't always ride motorcycles or wear leather. Sometimes heroes are just ordinary people who decide they won't stay quiet anymore. So ask yourself, the next time you witness cruelty,